She packed in darkness, her daughter's school uniforms folded carefully, important documents in a waterproof folder, the stuffed elephant that Emma couldn't sleep without. Outside, headlights illuminated the parking lot as the landlord's crew assembled. A sheriff's deputy, 2 movers, and Douglas Reeve himself, checking his watch impatiently because evictions were scheduled for exactly 6:15 a.m., and he wanted this done efficiently. At dawn, they knocked. She opened the door already dressed, already packed, not giving them the satisfaction of chaos or tears. Just calm compliance while they moved her furniture to the curb, the second-hand couch, the wobbly kitchen table, the bed where she'd read her daughter bedtime stories for 3 years. Neighbors watched from windows, probably judging, definitely grateful it wasn't them. The landlord made comments loud enough for everyone to hear about deadbeats and irresponsibility, never asking why she'd been late with rent, never caring about the emergency that caused it. She signed the eviction paperwork without reading it, took her daughter's hand, and walked away carrying 2 suitcases toward a car that everyone assumed would take them nowhere good. By 10 a.m., Douglas was celebrating. By 1:47 p.m., his world ended. 3 black SUVs arrived carrying lawyers with documents that seized his entire property because the single mother he'd evicted at dawn was Rachel Martinez, daughter of Robert Martinez, the silent majority shareholder who'd financed the building. Her wrongful eviction violated a protected tenant clause that triggered immediate foreclosure. And while Douglas had been boasting about cleaning up his building, Rachel's father had been activating provisions that would strip Douglas of everything: the property, his contracts, his accounts, his business. Every lock would be changed, except the one to Rachel's apartment, because that door would stay open, waiting for the tenant who should never have been forced to leave. Tuesday, November the 21st, 2023, 5:32 a.m. Riverside Gardens Apartments, Portland, Oregon. Rachel Martinez woke to her alarm in darkness, though she'd barely slept. She'd spent most of the night doing final preparations, sorting belongings into essential and leave behind, writing instructions for Emma's teacher, explaining they'd be temporarily displaced, packing the car with everything that mattered most. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of rain against windows. Typical Portland November weather, cold and wet, the kind of morning that made being forced from your home even more miserable. Emma slept on the couch, wrapped in her favorite blanket, the pink fleece with unicorns that Rachel had bought at Target 3 years ago when they'd first moved in. Rachel had moved her there from the bedroom last night, so the movers wouldn't wake her when they took the bed. Rachel stood in the small kitchen making coffee. She didn't really want but needed anyway. The counter was already bare. She'd packed the toaster. The coffee maker would be one of the last things to go into a box. The dish rack sat empty because she'd washed and packed all the dishes last night. 3 years of making breakfast in this kitchen, of Emma sitting at the small table doing homework while Rachel cooked dinner, of quiet Sunday mornings when they'd make pancakes together and pretend everything was fine, even when it wasn't. She walked through the apartment one more time, checking that she hadn't forgotten anything essential. The living room was mostly empty. Couch and TV would go to the curb. Her laptop and important electronics were already in the car. Emma's room was packed except for the furniture, the bed frame, the small dresser with stickers Emma had put on it, the bookshelf full of picture books that Rachel couldn't fit in the car and would have to leave behind. Her own bedroom was equally bare, the bed she'd shared with David before he died, where she'd slept alone for 4 years, where she'd cried into her pillow after receiving the eviction notice. The movers would take it to the curb in a few hours, and it would probably end up in a landfill, because who wanted a used bed with a broken frame and a mattress that had seen better days? Rachel checked her phone. 5:47 a.m. The eviction crew would arrive at 6 a.m. to set up. Enforcement would begin at 6:15 a.m. She had 28 minutes of living in this apartment, 28 minutes before everything changed. She pulled out her phone and took photos. The empty living room where Emma had learned to walk, the kitchen where they'd celebrated birthdays with homemade cakes, the small balcony where she'd sat on summer evenings, watching Emma play in the courtyard below. She wanted to remember this place not as the apartment she'd been evicted from, but as the home where they'd survived together after David's death, where they'd built a life from grief and determination. At 5:52 a.m., she heard the first vehicle pull into the parking lot, then another, then a third. She looked out the window and saw them assembling in the pale pre-dawn light. Sheriff's Deputy Marcus Thompson in his cruiser, a large moving truck with Davidson Moving Services on the side, and Douglas Reeves' silver BMW. Douglas got out of his car wearing expensive casual clothes, designer jeans, a leather jacket that probably cost more than Rachel's monthly rent, boots that were too clean to have ever done actual work. He stood in the parking lot checking his phone, looking impatient, like this eviction was an inconvenience to his schedule rather than the destruction of a family's home. Two workers emerged from the moving truck, young men, probably early 20s, who'd been hired to do the physical labor of carrying someone's life to the curb. They looked cold and uncomfortable, probably not enjoying this assignment any more than Rachel was experiencing it. Deputy Thompson walked over to speak with Douglas. Rachel couldn't hear their conversation through the window, but she saw Douglas gesture toward her apartment, saw the deputy nod and check his paperwork, saw them both look up at her window where she stood watching. She stepped back from the window, not wanting them to see her watching, not wanting to give Douglas the satisfaction of knowing how much this hurt. At 6 a.m., lights started coming on in neighboring apartments. Mrs. Patterson in 3B, an elderly woman who'd been kind to Rachel, who'd babysat Emma occasionally, appeared in her window looking distressed. The Rodriguez family in 2C were all at their window, parents and two teenage kids, watching like this was a spectacle, entertainment for a Tuesday morning. Rachel hated that part most, not the eviction itself, but the performance of it, the public nature. The way Douglas had specifically scheduled it for dawn, so maximum neighbors would witness her humiliation as they woke up for work or school. She made herself another cup of coffee, her hands shaking slightly as she poured. She'd been preparing for this moment for a month, since the judge had ruled against her, since she'd known the eviction was inevitable. She'd thought she was ready, but standing in her apartment waiting for strangers to arrive and dismantle her life, she realized you're never really ready for something like this. At 6:08 a.m., Emma stirred on the couch. "Mama?" Rachel went to her immediately, sitting beside her, stroking her hair. "Good morning, sweetheart. Is it time?" "Almost. We need to get you dressed and ready." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "I don't want them to take my bed. Where will I sleep?" "We're going to stay in a really nice hotel for a little while. They have big comfortable beds and room service and a pool. It'll be like a vacation." "I don't want a vacation. I want to stay home." Rachel's heart broke. "I know, baby, I know, but sometimes things happen that we can't control, and we have to be brave and make the best of them. Why does Mr. Reeve get to make us leave? Because he owns the building and we rent from him, and when we couldn't pay rent exactly on time, he decided that was enough reason to make us leave." "But you paid it. You showed me the receipt." "I know, but I paid it a few days late, and the lease says that's not allowed." "That's not fair." "No, it's not, but we're going to be okay. We're survivors, remember? We survived when Daddy died. We'll survive this too." Rachel helped Emma get dressed, jeans, a warm sweater, her winter coat, because November mornings in Portland were cold and they'd be outside while the movers worked. She braided Emma's hair carefully, taking her time, wanting these last moments in their home to be gentle and normal, even though nothing about this was normal. At 6:14 a.m., there was a knock at the door. Rachel took a deep breath, squeezed Emma's hand, and opened it. Sheriff's Deputy Marcus Thompson stood there with the two movers behind him. Douglas Reeve waited a few feet back, arms crossed, looking satisfied. "Ms. Martinez," Deputy Thompson said, his voice professionally neutral. "I'm Deputy Thompson with the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office. I have an order of eviction I'm required to enforce. The order states that you and your minor child must vacate these premises immediately, and that your personal property will be removed and placed outside. Do you understand?" "Yes, I understand," Rachel said calmly. "Do you need time to gather any personal items before we begin?" "No, I've already packed everything essential. It's in my car. You can proceed with removing the furniture." Deputy Thompson looked slightly relieved. He'd clearly done evictions that involved screaming and resistance and refusal to leave, and Rachel's calm compliance was making his job easier. "Okay, the crew will work as quickly as possible. You're welcome to stay and supervise, or you can leave now if you prefer. I'll stay until you're finished. I want to make sure everything is handled properly." The movers entered and began their work. They were professional and not deliberately rough, but watching strangers disassemble your bed, carry your couch down the stairs, stack your kitchen table and chairs on the sidewalk, it was surreal and violating regardless of how carefully they did it. Rachel walked Emma down to the car first, not wanting her to watch the furniture removal. She buckled her into the back seat where Emma couldn't see what was happening, turned on the car heater, and put on a movie on her iPad. Anything to distract her from the trauma unfolding around them. Then Rachel went back upstairs to supervise. The movers worked efficiently. Bedroom furniture out, living room furniture out, kitchen items boxed and carried out. 20 minutes and her apartment was empty except for cleaning supplies and the few items Rachel would carry. Herself. Douglas stood in the doorway watching the whole process, his presence completely unnecessary but clearly intentional. He wanted to be here, wanted to witness this, wanted to make sure Rachel knew he'd won. As Rachel carried a box of Emma's toys past him, he spoke loud enough for neighbors to hear. "You know, you could have avoided all this if you'd just been responsible with your money." Rachel stopped, looked at him directly. "Mr. Reeve, I was responsible. I paid rent perfectly for 36 consecutive months. I experienced one emergency, a car repair necessary to keep my job, that made me a few days late. I communicated immediately, provided documentation, and paid in full, including your late fee within 3 days. That's not irresponsibility. That's handling an emergency as well as anyone possibly could. The lease says rent is due on the 1st. You didn't pay on the 1st. That's a violation. Yes, and human beings experience emergencies. Reasonable landlords. Understand that and work with good tenants who've proven their reliability. I'm not running a charity. I never asked for charity. I asked for basic understanding after 3 years of perfect tenancy. You refused, so here we are." "Here we are," Douglas agreed, looking pleased with himself. "And this is what happens when people don't follow the rules." Rachel wanted to say more, wanted to point out that he was violating the spirit of fairness, even if he was technically following the letter of the lease, wanted to ask if he felt good about putting a 7-year-old on the street, wanted to tell him that consequences work both ways. But she just carried her box to the car and went back for another load. By 6:47 a.m., everything was on the curb. Rachel's couch with the juice stain from when Emma had spilled grape juice 2 years ago. The kitchen table that wobbled because one leg was slightly shorter. The bed frame that was scratched and worn. The bookshelf that had held Emma's. Growing collection of books, all stacked on the sidewalk like garbage, like the physical manifestation of failure, like proof that Rachel couldn't make it on her own. Neighbors continued watching from windows. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked uncomfortable. A few looked judgmental, probably thinking this was what happened when single mothers couldn't manage their finances properly. Deputy Thompson had Rachel sign the eviction confirmation form on a clipboard, his pen barely working in the cold, damp air. "Do you have somewhere to go?" he asked quietly, clearly concerned despite his professional neutrality. "Yes. My father made arrangements. We'll be fine." "Good. I'm sorry this happened." "It's not your fault. You're just doing your job." As Rachel prepared to leave for the last time, Douglas called out one more comment, loud enough for everyone in the courtyard to hear. "Hey, next time you rent somewhere, try actually paying on time. Might help you keep the place longer." Rachel didn't respond. She just got into her Honda Civic where Emma was crying quietly in the back seat, started the engine, and pulled out of the Riverside Gardens parking lot as the rain intensified, washing over the furniture stacked on the curb, ruining what little value it might have had. Behind her, Douglas was already on his phone with his renovation contractor, discussing paint colors and appliance upgrades, treating Unit 2B like an investment opportunity rather than the home where a family had lived and loved and survived. Rachel had lived in apartment 2B at Riverside Gardens for 3 years and 2 months. She'd moved in shortly after her husband David's death, needing affordable housing close to her job and Emma's elementary school. The rent had been $1,450 when she'd signed the lease, manageable on her $42,000 salary as an administrative assistant at a nonprofit, especially with Emma's Social Security survivor benefits. For 36 consecutive months, she'd paid rent on time, not once late, not once short. She'd been a model tenant, quiet, respectful of neighbors, quick to report maintenance issues but never demanding. The previous landlord, an older couple who'd owned the property for decades, had appreciated her reliability. Then 6 months ago, the property had been sold. Douglas Reeve had purchased Riverside Gardens for $4.2 million as part of his real estate investment portfolio. He specialized in buying older apartment complexes in gentrifying neighborhoods, raising rents, and pushing out long-term tenants to maximize profit margins. Within weeks of taking ownership, Douglas had announced rent increases ranging from $200 to $400 per month for all units once existing leases expired. He'd also implemented strict new policies: late fees of $150, administrative charges for any lease violation, immediate eviction proceedings for non-payment. Rachel's lease had been up for renewal in August. Douglas had offered her a new lease at $1,850 per month, a $400 increase she simply couldn't afford. When she'd asked if he could keep her rent closer to the current rate, he'd been blunt. Market rate is market rate. If you can't afford it, that's not my problem. She'd signed the new lease anyway because finding another affordable apartment in Portland was nearly impossible. She'd planned to pick up extra work, cut expenses, somehow make it work. Then in October, her car's transmission had failed. The repair cost $3,200. Her car was essential. Public transportation from her neighborhood to her job would require 2 buses and 90 minutes each way, making it impossible to drop Emma at school and arrive at work on time. She'd needed the repair immediately, so she'd paid for the transmission and been short on rent by $800. She'd called Douglas the day rent was due, explained the situation, and offered to pay $650 immediately, with the remaining $150 paid in 2 weeks when she received her next paycheck. She'd provided documentation of the car repair, the invoice from the mechanic showing the emergency nature of the expense. Douglas had been unmoved. "Your lease states rent is due on the 1st. It's now the 1st. You don't have the full amount. That's a violation. You have until the 5th to pay in full plus a $150 late fee, or I'm filing for eviction." Rachel had scrambled. She'd borrowed money from a coworker, worked extra hours, sold some belongings. By November 3rd, 2 days late, she'd paid the full rent plus the late fee. Douglas had filed for eviction anyway. "You violated the lease," he'd told her when she'd called in shock after receiving the eviction notice. "Late payment is grounds for termination of tenancy. I'm within my legal rights." "But I paid everything. I'm current now." "The violation already occurred. The lease allows me to terminate based on that violation. You should have thought about this before failing to budget properly." Rachel had tried to fight it. She'd represented herself in housing court because she couldn't afford an attorney. She'd presented her payment history, her documentation of the emergency, her evidence of prompt repayment. The judge had been sympathetic but legally constrained. Oregon landlord-tenant law allowed eviction for lease violations. The lease clearly stated that late payment constituted a violation. Douglas had technically followed proper procedure. Eviction order granted, 30 days to vacate. Today was day 30. Rachel heard vehicles pulling into the parking lot at 5:50 a.m. She looked out the window and saw them assembling: a sheriff's cruiser, a large moving truck, Douglas's BMW. She woke Emma gently. "Sweetheart, we need to get ready now." Emma was 7 years old, small for her age, with dark hair like Rachel's and her late father's brown eyes. She'd been too young when David died to really remember him. But Rachel kept photos around the apartment and told stories so Emma would know her father had. Loved her. "Mama, I don't want to go," Emma said, tears already forming. "I know, baby. I don't want to go either, but we have to. Remember what we talked about? This is temporary. We're going to stay somewhere else for a little while, until we find a new home." "Why can't we stay here?" "Because the new landlord says we have to leave." "That's not fair." "No, it's not fair, but sometimes unfair things happen, and we have to deal with them anyway." Rachel dressed Emma in warm clothes, jeans, a sweater, her winter coat, and helped her put on shoes. She'd already packed Emma's school backpack with a change of clothes, toiletries, and comfort items. At 6:15 a.m. exactly, there was a firm knock on the door. Rachel took a deep breath, squeezed Emma's hand, and opened it. Sheriff's Deputy Marcus Thompson stood with 2 workers from a moving company Douglas had contracted. Behind them, Douglas Reeve himself waited, arms crossed, looking impatient. "Ms. Martinez," Deputy Thompson said professionally, "I have an order of eviction to enforce. You and your daughter need to vacate the premises immediately. The crew will remove your belongings and place them outside. You have 30 minutes to take any personal items you need immediately." "I'm ready," Rachel said calmly. "Most of what I need is already in my car. You can proceed." The movers entered and began working efficiently. Bed frame disassembled, mattress carried out, couch lifted by two men. They were professional, not rough, but watching strangers handle your belongings and carry them to the curb was surreal and humiliating, regardless of how carefully they did it. Neighbors' lights were coming on. Faces appeared in windows. Rachel saw Mrs. Patterson from 3B peeking through her blinds, Mr. Johnson from 1A stepping onto his patio to watch, the Rodriguez family from 2C looking down from their second-floor window, all watching her family being put out on the street. Rachel carried Emma to the car first, buckling her into the back seat where she couldn't see the furniture accumulating on the curb. Then Rachel made trips between the apartment and car, loading the few boxes she'd packed with clothes, kitchenware, Emma's toys. Douglas stood in the parking lot the entire time, watching with visible satisfaction. "Could have avoided this if you'd just managed your money better," he called out as Rachel walked past carrying a box. "But people like you never learn." Rachel didn't respond. She placed the box in her trunk and went back for another load. "I'm talking to you," Douglas said, moving into her path. "You understand this is your fault, right? You failed to pay rent. You violated your lease. Actions have consequences." Rachel stopped and looked at him directly. "Mr. Reeve, I paid rent on time for 36 months straight. I had one emergency, a documented car repair necessary for me to work, that made me 2 days late. I communicated immediately. I paid in full plus your late fee within 3 days. I did everything I could to be responsible, except pay on time. I experienced a financial emergency. I handled it as quickly as possible. Most landlords would have understood that. Most landlords are soft. I'm not. You violated your lease. You're facing the consequences. Maybe next time you'll budget better. Maybe next time you'll remember that consequences work both ways," Rachel said quietly. Douglas didn't catch the meaning. He just smirked. "Sure. Good luck finding another landlord who will rent to you with an eviction on your record." By 7 a.m., the apartment was empty. Everything Rachel owned either fit in her car or was stacked on the curb. Furniture, kitchen items, boxes of belongings she'd have to decide about later. Deputy Thompson had Rachel sign the eviction confirmation form. "Do you have somewhere to go?" he asked quietly. "Yes, thank you." Rachel had made arrangements. 3 days ago, after the eviction date was finalized, she'd called her father. Robert Martinez was 74 years old, semi-retired, living comfortably in Seattle off investments from a 40-year career in commercial real estate development. He'd offered immediately to pay off her rent and legal fees to get the eviction stopped. Rachel had declined. "Dad, I tried to work with Douglas Reeve. I communicated, I documented everything. I paid as soon as I could. He filed for eviction anyway because he wants to raise the rent. Fighting it will just delay the inevitable. He'll find another reason to evict me, or he'll make my life miserable until I leave on my own." "Where will you go?" "I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out." "Rachel, let me help." "You can help by letting me stay with you for a few weeks while I find something new." "Of course, but I want you to do something for me first. I want you to let the eviction happen. Don't fight it, don't make it difficult, just comply and leave. Can you do that?" "Dad, that's what I'm planning." "I know, I'm just making sure, because after you leave, I'm going to handle this my way." That conversation had been 3 days ago. Rachel hadn't fully understood what her father meant, but she'd trusted him. Now, standing in the parking lot, watching the last of her belongings carried to the curb, Rachel pulled out her phone and sent her father a text. "It's done. We're leaving now." His response came immediately. "Good. Go to the Marriott downtown. I have a reservation for you under your name. Stay there as long as you need. I'm handling the rest." Rachel got into her Honda Civic, looked at Emma in the back seat, clutching her stuffed elephant, and drove out of Riverside Gardens for what she thought was the last time. Behind her, Douglas was already on his phone with his renovation contractor discussing plans for Unit 2B. He had no idea what was coming. 10:23 a.m. Douglas Reeve's office. Douglas sat at his desk, reviewing financial projections for Riverside Gardens while drinking his third coffee of the morning. The eviction had gone smoothly. No drama, no resistance. The tenant had left quietly just as he had expected. Now, he could move forward with his plans. The office was in a small commercial building he owned in southeast Portland, a 2-story structure with retail space on the ground floor and offices above. Douglas used the second floor for his property management company, Reeve Holdings, LLC, which managed his growing portfolio of rental properties. He'd started investing in real estate 12 years ago with a single duplex purchased with money inherited from his parents. Now he owned 7 properties, 3 small apartment buildings, 2 duplexes, and 2 single-family homes. 34 rental units, total generating approximately $48,000 monthly in gross rent. Riverside Gardens was his largest and most recent acquisition, purchased 6 months ago for $4.2 million with plans to optimize it into a cash-flowing asset that would generate enough profit to fund his next acquisition. His phone rang. Tom Chen, a real estate investor friend who'd been mentoring Douglas for the past 5 years. "Tom, good morning. How's the market treating you?" "Can't complain. Closed on that fourplex in Beaverton last week. Solid cash flow, good neighborhood. Hey, I heard you had an eviction scheduled today at Riverside Gardens. How'd it go?" "Perfect. Tenant was out by 7. Crew's already working on the unit. I'm going to have it renovated and back on the market within 2 weeks. Wasn't she a long-term tenant? I thought you mentioned she'd been there a few years." "3 years, yeah, but she paid late last month. Had some sob story about a car repair. Said she couldn't pay rent on time because she had to fix her transmission." "That seems like a legitimate emergency. Cars break down. People need them to get to work." Douglas bristled at the criticism. "Legitimate or not, it's not my problem. The lease is clear. Rent is due on the 1st. If she can't manage her finances well enough to have an emergency fund, that's on her. I don't run a charity, Tom. I run a business." "I get that, but she did pay, right? Just a few days late?" "She paid within 3 days, yes, but the violation had already occurred. Late payment is grounds for eviction per the lease terms. I followed procedure, gave her proper notice, went through the court system. Everything was by the book." "Seems harsh to evict someone over one late payment after 3 years of on-time rent, especially when they paid quickly." Douglas was getting irritated now. Tom was usually supportive of aggressive property management, but today he seemed to be questioning Douglas's decision. "Harsh? It's business. You let tenants get away with late payments once, they start thinking rules don't apply to them. Next month they're late again. The month after, they're short on rent. Before you know it, you're chasing money constantly, and your cash flow is unpredictable. No, you enforce standards, you maintain discipline, you don't make exceptions. Even for good tenants who've proven their reliability over years. There are no exceptions. That's the whole point. If you make exceptions, you're admitting rules are flexible. Then every tenant thinks they deserve special treatment for their unique circumstances." Tom was quiet for a moment. "Okay, your property, your decision. What's your plan for the unit?" Douglas relaxed, glad to move past the criticism. "Full renovation. I'm thinking modern aesthetic, gray paint instead of the beige that's there now, new carpet, upgraded appliances. Basically make it look upscale enough to justify a significant rent increase." "How much are you increasing it?" "She was paying $1,450. I'm listing it at $1,900. That's $450 more per month, $5,400 annually from one unit. Multiply that across the property and you see the potential. You've got other units you're planning to turn over, 4 more with below-market rents. Long-term tenants who've been there since before I bought the property, all paying between $1,400 and $1,600 when market rate is closer to $1,850 to $2,000. I'm working on transitioning them out over the next 6 months. How are you getting them out? Just waiting for leases to expire and raising rents? That's one method. But I'm also being more strict about lease enforcement. Late fees, lease violations, maintenance complaints, anything that gives me grounds to terminate. Some tenants will leave on their own when I raise rents. Others I'll push out for cause. Either way, within a year, I'll have the entire property at market rate." Douglas pulled up his spreadsheet and shared his screen with Tom over their video call. "Look at these numbers. Current annual gross rent is $936,000. That's 48 units averaging $1,625 per month. But market rate analysis shows I should be getting $1,900 average. If I can push every unit to market rate, that's $1,094,400 annually, an increase of $158,400. That's significant, right? And my operating expenses won't increase proportionally. Property taxes, insurance, basic maintenance, those are relatively fixed. So that $158,400 in additional revenue flows almost directly to net operating income. That improves my cap rate, increases property value, and either gives me better cash flow if I hold, or a higher sale price if I decide to sell in a few years. Tom studied the spreadsheet. Your loan payment is what, about $22,000 monthly? $22,147 exactly. Principal and interest on the $3.8 million I borrowed. So, you're currently cash flowing about $3,000 per month after all expenses, which is fine for now, but once I optimize rents, I'll be cash flowing closer to $10,000 monthly. That's $120,000 annually in passive income from one property. Assuming you can actually push all rents to market rate without losing occupancy? Why would I lose occupancy? Portland rental market is tight. For every tenant I evict or push out, there are 10 people willing to pay market rate. I've already got a waiting list of prospective tenants. They talked for another 15 minutes about Douglas's expansion plans. He was looking at another apartment complex in Gresham, a 36-unit building that was similarly underperforming and could benefit from aggressive management and rent optimization. After hanging up with Tom, Douglas made another call, this time to his property manager, Linda Kim, who handled day-to-day operations at Riverside Gardens. Linda, it's Douglas. Give me an update on the Unit 2B renovation. Contractor started at 7:30 this morning. They've ripped out the old carpet, prepped the walls for painting. He's saying 2 weeks for completion, maybe less if the new appliances arrive on schedule. Good. What's our budget looking like? He's estimating $8,200 all in. That includes paint, carpet, appliances, and some minor repairs too. The bathroom tile. Douglas winced. He'd budgeted $5,000, but $8,200 was acceptable if it meant he could charge $450 more per month. The increased rent would cover the renovation cost in about 18 months, after which it was pure profit. Fine, approve it. I want this done fast and done right. This unit is going to be my showcase. When other tenants see how nice 2B looks after renovation, they'll understand why I'm raising their rents. Speaking of rent increases, I've had 5 more tenants contact me about the notices you sent. They're asking if you'd consider smaller increases or if they can do payment plans. No to both. Market rate is market rate. If they can't afford it, they have 60 days to find somewhere else. A couple of them are older residents on fixed incomes. One is Mrs. Patterson in 3B. She's been here 9 years. She's asking if there's any flexibility because her Social Security doesn't increase enough to cover a $300 rent increase. Linda, I understand that's difficult for her, but her financial situation isn't my responsibility. She's paying $1,500 for a 2-bedroom unit when I can get $1,800 for the same unit. That's $3,600 per year in lost revenue. Over 9 years, that's $32,400 I've essentially subsidized her housing. That ends now. She's asking if she can stay if she finds a roommate to help cover the increase. The lease specifies maximum occupancy. If she adds a roommate, that's a lease modification requiring my approval and additional security deposit. Tell her she can submit an application if she wants. But I'm not promising anything. Douglas was tired of tenants acting like their personal circumstances created obligations for him. He'd bought Riverside Gardens as an investment, not as a social service. His job was to maximize returns, not to provide affordable housing for people who couldn't afford market rates. After the call with Linda, Douglas pulled up a real estate blog he followed and started reading about market trends in Portland. Rental rates had been climbing steadily, up about 8% year over year. If that trend continued, the $1,900 he was planning to charge for Unit 2B might actually be conservative. Maybe he should list it at $1,950 and see what the market would bear. At 11:30 a.m., Douglas drove to a lunch meeting with another investor friend, Sarah Mitchell, who owns several properties in the Portland metro area. They met at an upscale restaurant in the Pearl District, the kind of place with $18 salads and $15 cocktails, where real estate investors and business owners networking over expensive meals. "Sarah, good to see you," Douglas said, shaking her hand as they sat at a window table overlooking the city. "Douglas, how's Riverside Gardens treating you?" "Really well. Just evicted a problem tenant this morning. Should have that unit renovated and re-rented at a much higher rate within 2 weeks." Sarah raised an eyebrow. Problem tenant? What was the issue? Chronic late payment. Couldn't manage her finances. Had to remove her to maintain standards. Chronic? How many times was she late? Once, but once is enough to establish a pattern of irresponsibility. Sarah laughed. You evicted someone for being late once? It's about setting expectations. You can't let tenants think the rules are flexible. That seems extreme, but I guess you run your properties your way. Is the eviction going to cost you lost rent while you renovate? About 2 weeks of vacancy, but I'm raising the rent enough to make up for it quickly. She was paying $1,450. I'm listing it $1,900. The $450 increase covers the vacancy cost in about 2 weeks. Then it's pure profit. They ordered lunch and continued discussing market conditions, financing strategies, and potential acquisitions. Sarah was more conservative than Douglas. She preferred to keep good tenants even if they paid slightly below market, believing that tenant stability reduced turnover costs and vacancy rates. But Douglas believed in aggressive optimization, pushing every unit to maximum profitability. By the time lunch ended at 1:15 p.m., Douglas was feeling confident about his business strategy. The eviction had gone smoothly. The renovation was underway. His financial projections showed strong upside. Everything was going according to plan. He drove back to Riverside Gardens to check on the renovation progress, pulling into the parking lot at 1:42 p.m., completely unaware that his entire world was about to collapse. His phone rang. Tom Chen, a real estate investor friend. Tom, good morning. How's the market treating you? Can't complain. Hey, I heard you had an eviction scheduled today at Riverside Gardens. How'd it go? Perfect. Tenant was out by 7. Crew's already working on the unit. I'm going to have it renovated and back on the market within 2 weeks. Wasn't she a long-term tenant? 3 years? Yeah, but she paid late. Had some sob story about a car repair. I don't run a charity. Lease says rent is due on the 1st. If you can't pay on time, you don't belong in my properties. Seems harsh for one late payment after 3 years of on-time rent. Douglas bristled slightly. Harsh? It's business. You let tenants slide once, they think rules don't apply to them. Next month they're late again. Then they're short on rent. Before you know it, you're chasing payments constantly. No, you enforce the lease. You maintain standards. I guess. What's your plan for the unit? Full renovation, new paint. I'm thinking gray instead of beige, more modern. New carpet throughout. Upgraded appliances, stainless steel refrigerator, new stove. Basically make it look upscale enough to justify raising rent. How much are you raising it? She was paying $1,450. I'm listing it at $1,900. That's $450 more per month. $5,400 annually just from one unit. And I've got 4 more units with below-market rents that I'm working on turning over in the next 6 months. If I can push all of them to market rate, that's an additional $22,000 per year in revenue with minimal renovation costs. Your ROI must look good. Fantastic. I bought the property for $4.2 million with $400,000 down. My loan is costing me about $22,000 monthly between principal and interest. With current rents, I'm cash flowing about $3,000 per month after expenses. But once I optimize the property, get rid of these legacy tenants paying below market and renovate their units, I'll be cash flowing closer to $8,000 monthly. That's an extra $60,000 per year. Douglas pulled up his spreadsheet showing the numbers. Riverside Gardens had 48 units. Currently, average rent was $1,625. If he could push average rent to $1,850 across all units, his annual gross revenue would increase from $936,000 to $1,068,000, an increase of $132,000 annually with minimal additional operating costs. You've got it all figured out, Tom said. I do. Real estate is simple if you're willing to be disciplined. Buy properties with upside potential. Remove tenants who aren't paying market rate. Renovate units. Increase rents. Maximize cash flow. That's the formula. What about tenant retention? Isn't there value in keeping good long-term tenants? There's value in tenants who pay market rate. That woman I evicted today, she was paying $400 below market. Over 3 years, that's $14,400 in lost revenue. Why would I keep her just because she's been here a while? Because stability has value? Because turnover costs money? Turnover is an investment. I spend $5,000 renovating a unit. I increase rent by $450 per month. I break even in 11 months and profit forever after. That math makes sense. They talked for a few more minutes before hanging up. Douglas sat back in his chair, feeling satisfied. The eviction had gone exactly as planned. The tenant hadn't caused problems. The renovation was starting today. The unit would be listed by next week. Everything was under control. His phone rang again. This time it was his property manager, Linda Kim, calling from Riverside Gardens. Douglas, the contractor is here for Unit 2B. He's asking about scope of work. I sent him the specs, full paint, new carpet, new appliances. He wants to confirm budget. He's saying with the appliances you want, he's looking at $8,000 all in. Douglas winced slightly. He'd budgeted $5,000. But the higher-end appliances would help justify the increased rent. Fine. Tell him to proceed. I want it done fast. 2 weeks maximum. Got it. Also, I've had 3 tenants ask about their rent increases. They received the notices you sent last week about increases effective January 1st. They're asking if you'd consider smaller increases or payment plans. No and no. Market rate is market rate. If they can't afford it, they can leave, and I'll find tenants who can. Okay, I'll let them know. Douglas hung up and pulled up a document he'd been drafting, a notice to all Riverside Gardens tenants informing them that effective January 1st, rents would be increasing to market rate. Most tenants would see increases between $150 and $350 per month. He expected some pushback. He expected some tenants to move out. That was fine. Turnover gave him opportunities to renovate and raise rents even more. At 11:45 a.m., Douglas drove to Riverside Gardens to check on the renovation progress. The contractor had already started in Unit 2. B, furniture was gone, either taken by Rachel or disposed of. Old carpet was being ripped out. Walls were being prepped for painting. Looking good, Douglas said, walking through the empty apartment. This is going to be a nice unit once you're done. Should be, the contractor agreed. With the upgrades you're doing, you'll have no problem renting it at the higher rate. Douglas stood in the empty living room, imagining the finished product. New gray paint, plush carpet, modern appliances, a tenant, paying $1,900 per month instead of the $1,450 Rachel had paid. This unit alone would generate an additional $5,400 annually. Multiply that across the property. 4 or 5 more units upgraded, another $20,000 per year in revenue. Within 2 years, he'd have the entire complex optimized. Cash flow would be strong, and he could either refinance and pull equity out or sell the property for a significant profit. Real estate investing 101. Buy low, add value, increase income, sell high, or hold for cash flow. Douglas was congratulating himself on his business acumen when his phone rang again. Unknown number, Seattle area code. Hello? Mr. Reeve, this is Catherine Park. I'm Senior Counsel for Pacific Commercial Real Estate Finance. Do you have a few minutes to discuss your loan on Riverside Gardens? Douglas's stomach tightened slightly. Calls from lenders were rarely good news. Of course. Is there a problem? We need to discuss an issue that's come up regarding tenant. Protections under your loan agreement. Are you currently at the property? Yes, I'm at Riverside Gardens now. Good. My legal team and I are on our way there. We should arrive within 30 minutes. Please wait for us at the leasing office. Wait, what's this about? I'd prefer to discuss it in person. We'll see you shortly. The call ended. Douglas stared at his phone, confused and concerned. Why would his lender need to send a legal team to discuss tenant protections? He pulled up his loan documents on his phone, all 87 pages of them, and started scrolling through, trying to find any provisions about tenant protections. The loan was standard commercial real estate financing, $3.8 million principal, 6.5% interest, 20-year term with monthly payments of approximately $22,000. There were standard clauses about maintaining the property, carrying adequate insurance, paying property taxes. But he didn't see anything about how he managed tenants. Douglas walked back to the leasing office, his earlier satisfaction replaced by growing unease. Something was wrong. He could feel it. 1:47 p.m., Riverside Gardens Apartments. Douglas sat at the desk in the small leasing office reviewing loan documents on his laptop when he heard vehicles pulling into the parking lot. He looked out the window and saw 3 black SUVs, expensive, professional, definitely not tenants. A woman in a sharp gray suit emerged from the lead vehicle, followed by 4 other people carrying briefcases and document folders. They walked toward the leasing office with purpose. Douglas stepped outside to meet them. "I'm Douglas Reeve. Are you Ms. Park?" "Catherine Park, yes. This is my legal team from Pacific Commercial Real Estate Finance. Is there somewhere we can talk privately?" "The leasing office is private. Come in." They entered the small office, barely large enough for the desk, filing cabinets, and now 6 people. Catherine placed a leather folder on the desk and opened it. "Mr. Reeve, I'm going to get directly to the point. At 8:15 this morning, the majority investor in Pacific Commercial Real Estate Finance invoked an acceleration clause in your loan agreement. As of this moment, your loan has been declared in default and this property is being seized as collateral." Douglas stared at her. "What? That's impossible. I've made every payment on time. I haven't defaulted on anything." "The default isn't based on payment. It's based on violation of tenant protection provisions in Section 47, Paragraph 8 of your loan agreement." "I don't know what you're talking about. There are no tenant protection provisions in my loan." Catherine pulled out a document. "This is your loan agreement, executed May 15, 2023. Section 47, Paragraph 8 is on page 52. She slid it across the desk. Douglas grabbed it and read. Section 47. Protected tenant provisions. Paragraph 8. The borrower agrees that eviction of any tenant must be for proper cause as defined in this agreement. Proper cause for eviction shall not include late payment of rent if a. The tenant provides written documentation of financial emergency beyond the tenant's reasonable control. B. The tenant communicates with the landlord about the situation within 7 days of the original due date. And C. The tenant makes full payment, including any reasonable late fees, within 30 days of the original due date. Eviction of any tenant meeting. These criteria shall constitute a material breach of this loan agreement and shall give the lender the right to declare the loan in default and accelerate full repayment of principal and interest. Douglas read it twice, his hands shaking. I never saw this. I never agreed to. Your signature is on page 87, acknowledging that you've read and agreed to all terms and conditions. Catherine showed him the signature page. His signature was clearly visible. But I didn't. My lawyer reviewed this. I didn't. Read every page myself. That's not our problem. You signed, you agreed. You're bound by all provisions. Douglas's mind was racing. Okay, even if this clause exists, I haven't violated it. I haven't evicted anyone improperly. This morning, at approximately 6:15 a.m., you evicted a tenant named Rachel Martinez from Unit 2B, correct? Yes, but she violated her lease by paying rent late. Did Ms. Martinez provide you with documentation of a financial emergency? Douglas hesitated. She said she had a car repair, but did she provide documentation? An invoice from a mechanic, yes, but that doesn't mean... Did she communicate with you about the situation within 7 days of the rent due date? She called me the day rent was due, but did she make full payment within 30 days? She paid within 3 days, actually, but the violation had already occurred. The clause specifically states that payment within 30 days negates the late payment as grounds for eviction. Ms. Martinez provided documentation of an emergency car repair, necessary for her to continue working. She communicated immediately. She paid within 3 days, including your late fee. Under the terms of your loan agreement, you were prohibited from evicting her. Douglas felt the floor dropping out from under him. Wait, this is about Rachel Martinez, the tenant I evicted this morning? Yes. You're telling me I can't evict a tenant who paid late because of some clause buried in my loan agreement that I never knew about. Ignorance of contract terms doesn't negate those terms. You agreed to them when you signed the loan documents. This is insane. Who even has provisions like this in commercial loans? Pacific Commercial Real Estate Finance has included protected tenant clauses in all loans since 1995, following litigation related to wrongful evictions. All borrowers agree to these terms. Most simply never violate them. Douglas's face was red. Fine, it's a bad clause. I didn't know about it, but we can fix this. I'll offer to let her back in. We'll reverse the eviction. It's too late for that. The violation occurred. The acceleration clause has been triggered. So, what does that mean? Catherine pulled out another document. It means the full balance of your loan, currently $3,762,449.18 in principal plus accrued interest, is due immediately. Since you obviously cannot pay that amount, we are exercising our right to seize the property as collateral pending foreclosure proceedings. Douglas felt like he'd been punched. You can't take my property over one eviction. That's absurd. We can and we are. The loan agreement specifically gives us this right upon material breach. You materially breach the agreement. We're exercising our remedy. I'll fight this. I'll sue. This is predatory lending. You're welcome to try, but your loan agreement includes a binding arbitration clause. Any disputes must go to arbitration, not court. And arbitrators tend to enforce contracts as written. You signed an agreement. You violated it. You lose. Douglas stood, his hands shaking. Who's behind this? Why are you really doing this? Catherine's expression didn't change. The majority investor in Pacific Commercial Real Estate Finance is a man named Robert Martinez. He holds 51% controlling interest in the consortium that finances our operations. 3 days ago, his daughter called him in distress, explaining that she was being evicted from her apartment despite having a documented emergency and paying rent within days of the due date. Mr. Martinez reviewed the situation, determined that the eviction violated protected tenant provisions in your loan agreement, and instructed us to invoke the acceleration clause. Douglas's face went white. His daughter? Rachel Martinez is his daughter? Yes. The single mother you evicted this morning? That's Robert Martinez's daughter. And you just gave him legal grounds to seize your property. I didn't know? How could I have known? You could have asked. You could have shown basic human decency to a tenant with 3 years of perfect payment history who experienced a documented emergency. Instead, you evicted her despite her full compliance with the loan agreement's protected tenant provisions. And now, you're facing consequences. Catherine pulled out more documents. This notice formally terminates your property management authority effective 2 p.m. today. You no longer have legal right to manage, access, or make decisions regarding Riverside Gardens. Another document. This notice freezes all financial accounts associated with the property pending transfer to new management. Another document. This notice requires you to vacate the leasing office by 3 p.m. today and remove all personal property. Douglas sat down heavily, staring at the documents that were destroying his investment, his business, his plans. What about the other tenants? They'll receive notice that the property is under new management. All existing leases will be honored. The rent increases you announced, canceled. The eviction proceedings you've initiated against other tenants, under review and likely canceled if they involve protected situations similar to Ms. Martinez's. You're just taking everything? We're enforcing the contract you signed. You borrowed $3.8 million. You agreed to specific terms, including tenant protections. You violated those terms. The property reverts to the lender. That's standard foreclosure procedure. Catherine checked her watch. You have until 3 p.m. to remove your personal belongings. After that, the locks are being changed and you'll be escorted from the property if you remain. What about Rachel Martinez? Where is she now? In significantly better accommodations than the ones you forced her out of this morning. Her father ensured that. Will she come back here? That's her decision. But yes, Unit 2B will be offered back to her at her original rent rate with all eviction records expunged and compensation for wrongful termination of tenancy. Whether she accepts is entirely up to her. Catherine gathered her documents. I recommend you use the remaining hour wisely, Mr. Reeve. Collect your property and leave. Make this transition smooth. Because if you create problems, we have legal remedies available that will make this situation significantly worse for you. She and her legal team walked out, leaving Douglas sitting alone in the office that was no longer his, in the building he no longer controlled, staring at documents that had just obliterated his investment and his future. Outside, maintenance crews were already arriving to change locks on the leasing office, the maintenance shop, and the main gates. Douglas sat there until 2:58 p.m., unable to process what had happened. At 2:59 p.m., a security guard knocked. "Sir, you need to leave now. The locks are being changed." Douglas grabbed his laptop, some files, and a photo of his family and walked out. As he reached his BMW in the parking lot, he watched workers changing locks on every door in the complex. Every door except one. Unit 2B's lock remained unchanged, waiting. Part 4. The Aftermath. That evening, Rachel sat in a hotel suite at the Portland Marriott downtown with Emma, who was watching cartoons and eating room service pizza. Rachel was on the phone with her father. "Dad, I still don't understand what you did. I enforced a contract Douglas Reeve violated when he evicted you. But he lost the entire property. That seems extreme. It's proportionate. He violated loan terms that were specifically designed to protect tenants like you, people who experience genuine emergencies and handle them responsibly. When he evicted you, despite your full compliance with those protections, he triggered consequences he had agreed to. What happens now? Now you decide what you want. Do you want your apartment back? Unit 2B is yours if you want it, same rent, new lease with better protections. Or I can help you find something better. Your choice." Rachel thought about it. "I don't think I want to go back. Emma was traumatized this morning. I don't want her living somewhere she associates with being evicted." "That's completely understandable. I'll help you find a new place." "What about Douglas Reeve? What about him? Will he be okay?" Robert was quiet for a moment. "Rachel, that man evicted you and your daughter at dawn after you had one emergency in 3 years. He threw your furniture on the curb. He made humiliating comments in front of your neighbors. He showed zero compassion. Do I care if he's okay? No. He's experiencing consequences of his own decisions. I guess I just don't like the idea of ruining someone's life." "You didn't ruin his life. He ruined it himself by violating a contract he signed. You were just trying to survive. He was just trying to maximize profit without regard for human cost. There's a difference. Thank you, Dad, for everything. You're my daughter. Of course I'm going to protect you." 6 months later, Douglas Reeve filed for bankruptcy. He'd lost his entire $400,000 down payment, was responsible for unpaid property taxes and fees, and had no assets left. His reputation in real estate was destroyed. Investors avoided him. Lenders wouldn't work with him. The story of the landlord who lost a $4 million property by evicting the wrong tenant became cautionary tale throughout the industry. Meanwhile, Riverside Gardens thrived under new management. Pacific Commercial Real Estate Finance hired a professional property management company that treated tenants with dignity, honored all existing leases, canceled all rent increases, and invested in long-deferred maintenance. Vacancy dropped, tenant satisfaction increased. The property became known as one of the better-managed complexes in Portland. Rachel found a nicer apartment in a better neighborhood, received a promotion at work, and used the $15,000 compensation she received from the wrongful eviction to take Emma to Disney World, a trip they'd both needed to heal from the trauma of that November morning. She never went back to Riverside Gardens, but Unit 2B remained available for her, rent unchanged, door unlocked, waiting for a return that never came. And Douglas Reeve learned the hardest lesson of his investing career, that vulnerability doesn't equal powerlessness, that contracts bind both parties, and that the single mother you evict at dawn might have family, resources, and legal protections you never bothered to discover before you threw her furniture on the curb. The moral: he evicted her at dawn to maximize humiliation. Furniture on the curb before sunrise, neighbors watching, cruel comments about deadbeats. She'd paid rent perfectly. For 36 months, late once due to documented car emergency, paid within 3 days. He evicted anyway because raising rent mattered more than her 3 years of reliability. By noon, he was celebrating his business acumen. By 1:47 p.m., legal team arrived with foreclosure documents. The single mother was Robert Martinez's daughter. Her eviction violated protected tenant clause in Douglas's loan agreement. He lost everything: $4.2 million property, $400,000 down payment, his business, because he never read the contract he signed and never showed compassion to someone who'd done everything right. Every lock changed except hers, because that door stayed open, waiting for the tenant who should never have been forced to leave.